Welcome to Doctors Unbound, your show devoted to doctors who are, well, unbound by physician stereotypes. Get a behind-the-scenes look at doctors that are breaking the mold and breaking into the worlds of technology, writing, investing, politics, just to name a few. This is Doctors Unbound, where you'll hear from experts with the insights to help you go to the next level. Let's get this show started. Here is your host, Dr. Dave Draginas.
Hey there, welcome to the next episode of Doctors Unbound. How are you doing? How you doing out there? Can you believe that it's already the fourth Monday of this brand new year? Did you make any New Year's resolutions? How is that going for you? Let me tell you, for me, last week was the first time that I finally got in a workout for this year, and it's definitely been a slow start. I'm going to blame it a little bit on the flu, a little bit on being sick at the turn of this new year, but I'm definitely looking to get better. My goal for the year hasn't changed, and that goal is 100 workouts by the end of the year, and that turns out to roughly 2 workouts per week. So that is what I am shooting for. I want to get that as a routine, a new routine for me in 2018 and going forward. And remember, when you're doing these changes, it is systems over goals. So reach out to me and let me know what you are working on to improve for 2018. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about today's guest. Very great show for you today. This guest has been featured on Kevin MD, on Doximity, and she runs a very popular Facebook group for physicians called Physician Side Gigs. We get into all sorts of interesting topics like mentorship, like work-life balance, how to make medical training more supportive for women. And yes, we do dig into what that Physician Side Gigs group is all about. And we also get into her favorite place to travel, the last question of the show. And let's just say it involves South America. Okay, without further ado, here is another great talk with Dr. Nisha Mehta. Welcome to another episode of Doctors Unbound. Today I've got a guest, Dr. Nisha Mehta. She's a radiologist by day and speaks and writes about important physician-related topics in her spare time, as if we ever have any spare time. Well, we'll get into some of those topics and explore the topic of side gigs for physicians as well. Dr. Mehta, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me. Please call me Nisha.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Nisha, we are going to start by getting to know you a little bit better. And with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about morning routines. Do you have one, or wish you had one?
I suppose we have a routine in that there's a very specific order in which we go about our morning, although it feels much more chaotic than the connotation I have with the word routine. So maybe organized chaos is a better term for it. I think my husband's a surgeon, and so I guess being a morning person kind of goes with that territory, I suppose, and probably for you as an anesthesiologist, it goes with the territory, but right. For the rest of us in my family, for myself and my 2 boys, we're certainly not. And so we essentially begrudgingly get out of bed every morning, somehow get ready in about 20 minutes. So there's definitely a method to the madness, but it usually involves a lot of prodding. And sometimes I'm the one who needs to be prodded. So basically, take the kids to the bathroom, brush their teeth, change their clothes, bring them downstairs, hand them off to my husband for breakfast, get myself ready, and then we all exit us out the door. So usually my husband takes the younger son to daycare, and I split carpool for my older child with a neighbor. And I kind of feel like, I guess, through the whole thing, there should be Survivor music playing in the background or something, because somebody's about to get booted off the island at any given moment.
Well, that sounds like quite a production before even your day gets started.
Yeah, it's never quite like when you see those families on TV who are enjoying breakfast together and discussing what they're going to do that day when somebody's making scrambled eggs. Actually, for my husband and I, that happens for us once the kids have been dropped off. So as soon as the kids have been dropped off, we call each other. We each have about a 30-minute commute to work. And so we have this phone date, quote unquote, every day where we go over what needs to be done that day, or we talk about whatever we were too tired to talk about the night before. So that's actually probably the only pleasant part of my morning routine. Everything else is just chaos. So
Gotcha. Well, at least you have that, and at least you're being efficient with your time where you have to, because sometimes there just isn't any other time.
I think it's forced efficiency because I want to sleep in for as long as humanly possible. So.
I hear that. I usually set my alarm for as late as possible before I need to get up. Very cool. Well, how about when you do have some time to enjoy a favorite food or drink? What does that look like for you?
So I am normally a creature of habit in almost everything except for food and drink. So, when people ask me what food or drink is, it kind of changes all the time because new food and we're constantly experimenting. So nothing stays a favorite for long. But if I had to pick an all-time favorite, I guess I would say that it's my mom's home-cooked Indian food. Because she just makes incredible food. And she, fortunately for me, comes here once a month for about 5 days. And then she usually cooks for the next 5 days.
Nice.
Before she leaves. So for a good portion of the month, we have really, really good food. In terms of stuff that, everyone else can relate to, at the moment, I'm really into Vietnamese banh mi sandwiches. So there's a restaurant here that serves a lemongrass tofu banh mi sandwich. And honestly, I'm like getting hungry talking about it right now. But,
that does sound pretty good.
It's really, really good. So there's that. And I guess drink-wise, there's a Peruvian restaurant here that makes a really amazing herbal limeade. It has, I think, lime, basil, rosemary, and mint, and maybe some other things, which I'm really into. So those are probably my favorite food and moment. Like I said, it's always evolving. We're vegetarians, so there's not a whole lot of variety, but we try to find it where we can.
Well, all that sounds pretty yummy. Thanks for sharing that. Now that's all I'm thinking about for the next half hour.
I know, right? Now I'm like, when am I going back to these restaurants? Okay, maybe tomorrow.
And how about a hobby that you like to do when not having to work or take care of the kids?
Yeah, so I am a total travel junkie. I think like everything about it. I like to talk about it. I like to plan trips. I, of course, love going on trips. I really could spend hours in the travel section of Barnes & Noble's perusing through Lonely Planet travel guides, like very literally hours, I think. So that's probably what I like to do the most in terms of an actual hobby. I love spending time with family and friends and reading and watching movies and all of those sorts of things. But if I had to pick one thing that I could do if I wasn't a physician, I would be some sort of professional travel person that got to run around the world and review things or something of that sort.
Well, very cool. And I think the very last question of our podcast here will be very apropos then. People will have to wait and see what your answer is to that one. But okay, we're going to move.
Well, I'm curious.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're going to move on here to kind of the meat of the discussion here. And I know that your father was a physician. Did you have any other physician role models going through your career and your training?
Certainly. So, like you said, my father has probably been my most consistent physician mentor. But my father and I are actually obviously demographically very different. He's grown up in a different time and did his training in India and came here. So our careers don't actually have a lot of parallels, although a lot of things by him. But I actually wrote an article about this once for my medical school student column that I do with the medical publishers. And I'm really not someone that believes that you should have one person that you idolize or strive to emulate, but really rather to find people who really exemplify certain skills or qualities that you want to develop. So I feel like I've had different role models for different aspects of things that I'm trying to develop. So leadership in medicine, being a woman in medicine, research, writing and speaking, they're always different people. And a point that I really like to make when I talk about mentorship is that you really shouldn't rule someone out because they're not like you. So I have a lot of people who I think would, sort of be obvious mentors, but in some ways they're really just great friends. that I can bounce ideas off of. And yes, there's mentorship that comes with that. But some of the most challenging mentors that have really pushed me to become better, or really to examine my beliefs and figure out exactly why it is that I do what I do, are people that aren't like me. And so, as an example, one of my most favorite recent mentors is actually an older male physician who has probably never uttered the words work-life balance in his life. And if you know anything about me and my work, like, I'm all about work-life balance. So it's interesting that we click so well, but he's honest and we have the same sort of sarcastic sense of humor. And so we click, and I can talk to him honestly, and I know I'll always get an honest opinion from him, and he'll ask me hard questions because he really truly doesn't get my opinion on things. And so when I'm forced to justify them, it sometimes strengthens my beliefs, and, other times it weakens them. But it's good to have somebody that challenges you in that way. So I could probably list off, 9 or 10 mentors that I really have felt have contributed different things to my life. And I'm always looking for more. So.
Well, very cool. And I think a couple of things that you said stood out to me, and are things that I agree with too. And that is, number one, finding mentors for specific things. Specific either skills that you want to learn, or maybe specific areas of expertise that they have. And then number two, not being afraid to have a mentor who thinks differently of you. I think as long as, like you said, people are authentic, people are willing to listen to each other and bounce those ideas off of each other, I think that's huge. And I think that's where, really growth happens, when people force you to they might challenge your beliefs or force you to defend your beliefs. That's when I think real growth happens. So I think that's awesome.
It's really true. And it's funny because we talk about physician mentors, right, and people who have really influenced my life in medicine. But I talk so much about my dad as a mentor because he's the obvious person to talk about. But in truth, I should really honestly talk about my mother just as much. And she's not a physician, and she's probably the most opposite from me that you could possibly be in terms of another female presence. I'm totally type A, and she's the furthest thing from it. If you talk to my husband, he always jokes around that we fight and love more like sisters than like a parent-daughter team. We're either really, really close or we fight a lot, but we do butt heads on everything. And it's really great because it's somebody that challenges me when I feel like, in a lot of the things that I do at this stage in my career, I feel like I found such a supportive group of friends and such supportive online communities and things like that. And so there's always people who are sort of saying, yeah, that's really great that you did that, and agreeing with me and saying that, I totally identify with that. And it's nice actually to have somebody who actually doesn't necessarily sympathize with me and says, it's actually not okay that you didn't do that thing. Like, you really should have signed up your kid for X, Y, and Z. And you can't just say that you're busy and you're not going to do it. Your kids' lives are important and you need to make the effort to do X, Y, and Z. And it's good to have that every once in a while, to have somebody disagree with you and tell you this is something that you need to do. And then, you may or may not take their advice depending on how it jives with your life. But just to have that viewpoint out there is really, really good. So, it's funny because when it comes to things about medicine, I feel like we have all these stressful situations and everything always seems like life and death. And my mom is very good at just saying, okay, let's put this in perspective. Yes, it wasn't an ideal thing that happened. Yes, there's going to be days where things, don't go right. And yes, this bad thing may happen in the future, but, you can't control everything. Stressing about things that may or may not happen is a waste of time. Don't do it. Just deal with it when it comes. And I think that is something in medicine that we really need to hear a little bit more often, because we do take ourselves so seriously. And my mom is always sort of reminding me, well, don't do that. You can't live your entire life worrying about things and taking everything so seriously. And so, in fact, in terms of my whole shift towards really focusing on what I want and work-life balance, and a lot of what I feel like I've tried to emphasize to other physicians, a lot of that has actually come from somebody who's not even a physician. It's really come from my mom. So I feel like I should give her some credit too.
Well, that's pretty cool. It's cool that you have that kind of relationship. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Going through medical school residency, fellowship, if you're doing that, is is really tough. So I imagine for women, it's even tougher. So how important is it for women in medicine to have good supportive mentors?
I can't overstate the importance of that. And I don't think that, well, so I think that so many female trainees and females at early stages of their careers are terrified to ask certain questions just for fear that it's going to make them look weak or less serious about their careers, or just in some way not be, consistent with their vision of what they're supposed to do as medical students. And when I was on faculty at UNC, I would sometimes try to have these conversations with the trainees, and they would sort of give me this blank stare, like, am I testing them? Or is this, going to count against them in some way? And I really honestly wanted to have these conversations, but I think people are so afraid to have them. And then once they start having them, it's like, everything is unleashed because they've been holding so much stuff in. And it's all stuff that's very pertinent to their lives in medicine. When am I going to have kids? Is it possible to get married right now and, think that I'm going to be able to do a long distance relationship while I'm in medicine? And am I going to be able to do, all these things that really contribute to our overall satisfaction and happiness in medicine? And also, is it practical to think that I can have a kid and also be a physician leader? Can I do X, Y, and Z? And people need people to ask those questions too. And honestly, that's not just a female thing. That's true for males too, right? I mean, these are all questions that you all have as well. I know that my husband had them, but it's just not part of the culture of medicine to talk about them. So I think it's ubiquitous in the sense that in general, we need to have more open mentorship about things that aren't just, well, how do you get published in this journal and how do you match into this residency of your choice? We also need to be having discussions about how do you create the life in medicine that you want. But women in particular, I think, have this sense that they need to prove that they deserve a seat at the table. And I hate that because we've worked just as hard to get where we are, and we have some strengths that our male counterparts don't, and we need to stop apologizing for the ways in which we're different. And I always try to stress that, but a big part of really believing that, instead of just paying it lip service, is having women that we look up to that also echo that message. And ideally, women in leadership positions that echo that message, because that's the only way that cultural change is really going to happen. So people need to start talking, women in particular, need to start talking about issues such as maternity leave and breastfeeding and work-life balance and job flexibility, because good mentorship really gives people confidence and it gives them skill sets that can be applied to unique situations. So once you've got a certain set of skills and you know how to approach a problem, well, then life is always going to throw other things at you, but you've got that skill set and you know how to address a situation by utilizing those similar tools. And it makes also, like, mentorship makes people feel like they're not alone. So we always talk about women trying to shatter glass ceilings and trying to do things that other people haven't done and increasing the number of women in leadership. But in order to do that, they need those skills. And that's why I think it's so important that they find people who they're comfortable with, that they can develop professionally with in that way, with a good, honest ability to ask the questions that they need to ask in order to get where they want to be.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more there. And hopefully one positive aspect of social media is I'm starting to see more of these conversations happen, and hopefully it allows physicians and women physicians not feel like they're so isolated. I think that's, part of the problem, and, kind of putting these questions out there and hopefully seeing that there are others that feel the same way, and hopefully making some of these connections, whether it be a mentorship role or a supportive role, things like that.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't even tell you, I probably have about 2 to 3 people every day reach out to me after they've either read something that I've wrote or, something that I've written, but, or something along those lines. And a lot of people are just saying, well, I had that same experience, and they just want to have somebody to say that to, and then be able to talk about what it is that's bothering them. And a lot of what I think is really great about social media is that it allows you to do that in somewhat of an anonymous context, because you might not feel comfortable saying that to your attending who may or may not be writing you a letter of recommendation later on, or, you never know who's judging you in what way. But social media gives you the ability to reach out to people who are unconnected to you in your daily life. And that allows you to have a sort of honesty and a sort of anonymity that allows you to really delve into these issues without feeling like there's going to be professional consequences. So I think that, so, I mean, obviously, social media is still, I always encourage everybody to be careful what they say on social media, because you never know who's listening. And, you know, some of these groups are so big that you never know who's reading what they're reading. And so obviously you got to be careful. But in these one-on-one conversations in these situations, I think it's really, really nice to have these discussions with some females who I feel like I've just had, you know, even for when they reach out to me, they're usually reaching out to me for advice. But even for myself, in sharing my own experiences with them while I'm trying to help them, I feel like it's so therapeutic for me too, to just be able to talk about those things. So it's really great.
Cool. Well, along those same lines, are there any changes that you can think of kind of offhand that come to mind to make, you know, training more, you know, accessible, supportive for women?
How much time do you have? So, I mean, I think, you know, one thing that I would really like to sort of stress too, again, and I said this before too, about it not just being a woman thing. You know, I think that women in medicine and the increase in women in medicine has definitely increased these conversations, but I think they're conversations that apply to all of us, right? I mean,
for sure.
Right now, physician culture is so stuck, you know, I don't even know how many years ago it's sort of stuck in terms of its mentality of, you know, this male physician who has, you know, in the ideal stereotypical situation, a stay-at-home wife who's taking care of everything at home and allows him to work 60 to 80 hours a week without any sort of interruptions. And that's not physician demographics today, right? I wish that I could give you, I'm trying to think of what the quote or where I read this, and I can't think of it offhand, but so I read somewhere that there's 85% of female physicians are married to another professional. And of that 85%, 40% or 50% of them are married to other physicians. So if you do the math, 40% of female physicians are married to male physicians. And then if you look at that the other way around, right, that means that a good number of male physicians are also married to female physicians.
Right.
And, you know, whether or not they're married to female physicians or not, a lot of them, certainly a lot more these days, are married to a spouse who is working and isn't at home. And so, you know, there's a whole different mentality there that comes with having two incomes and having the pressures that go along with two people that are working that don't necessarily, you know, I don't think our cultural change has evolved with those changing demographics, and particularly with all the millennials that you have now coming into the field who just have a different attitude, right? We always talk about how millennials are more focused on work-life balance and how millennials are willing to accept less money if it means that they have a better lifestyle. And these are all demographics that are changing for everyone. And so I think that a lot of these things that we sometimes frame as, you know, women's issues are really not just women's issues. They're really applicable to everybody. And that's one thing that I've become really cognizant about, because when I first started writing, I really wrote towards women in medicine. I was kind of like, this is my niche. These are my people. That's who I'm writing towards. Mm-hmm. And the more that I wrote along that, a lot of my guy physician friends I found were saying to me, well, that applies to me too. You know, I also don't want to work 60 hours a week. And I also don't want to work on holidays. And I don't want to be away from the kids and miss their soccer games. You know, why do you think that's just a female thing? And it's absolutely true, right? So it's not just a female thing. And I think as we look at things like the physician shortage and how that's getting worse, there is going to have to be a shift in the market, right? Market forces are going to take over. And if people aren't willing to work those kinds of hours, people are going to have to be more flexible and say, well, you know, we've always traditionally structured this job this way, but how can we structure it differently to make more people interested in it? And that's the only way that they're going to be able to recruit people. So I think that there's change happening on a more global level than just females in medicine. But I do think that, you know, women in medicine are sort of expediting that process. But if you want to think about, you know, just to get back to your original question before I went off on my soapbox, which I apologize for.
No worries. It was apropos to the conversation.
But you know, specific to women in medicine, I think, you know, more childcare centers at hospitals, backup sick childcare, breastfeeding rooms, paid maternity leave, and for that matter, paid paternity leave, correcting patients and other physicians when they refer to women physicians by their first name. I think that that's a pet peeve of a lot of physicians, and really makes them feel as though, you know, culturally people are telling them that they don't belong there as a female physician. We've already touched on more female in leadership positions. The salary gap, I think, is a big thing. So things to address that, more salary transparency, women getting more comfortable with negotiating and being comfortable in their skin in that way, and being able to ask for the things that they think that they need, being able to ask for flexible work hours. I think those are all things that eventually are going to need to be worked into the system because, women in medicine aren't a minority anymore, right?
Right.
Medical schools are 50% female. Eventually, our physicians, population is going to be 50% women. And so it's not that the field needs to accommodate women. It's really that the field needs to change because half the people in it want something that's different than what this traditional stereotype was. So,
well, I think that's a good answer. And those things I think are, like you said, they're going to have to change. We're going to move on a little bit here, and I'd like to discuss some of your current passion projects, side gigs. Can you tell us a little bit about what you kind of got going in that area?
Certainly. So I guess I'm a little schizophrenic at the moment because I'm jumping between two projects that I'm really excited about. So the first is my original side gig, which I think a lot more people know me for, which is the writing and the speaking about life in medicine. And then more recently, I've really been pulled towards a group that I started about 2 years ago called Physician Side Gigs. And that is, is it okay to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely.
The group? Okay.
Absolutely.
So that group has now grown to over 10,000 physicians who are pursuing side income streams or passion projects.
Which in and of itself is pretty phenomenal, I think, to that number and
right.
The size of that group.
I think it speaks to just where people are these days in medicine, and that, demographics are changing and people are starting to think about life outside of medicine and what their other passions are and how are other ways to get some flexibility in their lives, and so many other things I think that are implications of this growth and this phenomenon of people pursuing things on the side. And, I grew up around a lot of physicians because my dad is a cardiologist, and a lot of our family friends were also in medicine. And that wasn't something that was ever at the forefront of anybody's minds. Nobody really did stuff on the side unless they were doing it, in our case, my family did some stuff on the side, but we were doing it to help out other family members to get settled who had come over from India. And so we sort of invested in things to help them. But the primary push behind doing that was not, well, how can I make extra money? The thought was always, well, if I want to make extra money, I just work more. And that's not necessarily the case anymore. So, it's been really fun to help that community grow and watch as physicians help each other and develop their interests and develop these additional revenue streams. And it's been good for me because I've acquired a lot of knowledge about entrepreneurship and networking. And it's funny because when I started the group, it was because I knew nothing about those things and I wanted people to ask those questions too. And so I started the group with a core group of people where I knew they were doing other things on the side, and it was really just a forum to ask each other about those things. And then over the course of the 2 years, I sort of really learned a lot of these things as people began to participate. And I like that because I feel like I know how I grew through that group, and I'm hoping that other people will also be able to grow through that group in that way. So it's been really exciting. And I think the best part of it is that I have met so many interesting people who are doing such amazing things. And it's funny how you can connect with these people on so many levels that you've never really met before, but you're all sort of bonding together over these common goals and actually collaborating and working together to promote each other's things. And that has been really great because I think that's something that physicians traditionally haven't done as well as other groups of people, right? Business people have these great contacts and these great networks, and they're able to, there's always an answer for, oh, I need to know about X, I'm going to call this other person, and I need to know about Y, so I'm going to call person Z. And they have these networks that are so great. And we haven't necessarily developed those in any realm outside of clinical medicine. So I know who I'm going to call if I need a nephrology consult, and I know who I'm going to call if, my kid has something going on and I need a pediatrician's opinion. But who do I call if I want to set up a business and I don't know the first thing about setting up an LLC or what the tax benefits of a certain thing are? We don't know those things. And so it's good to be able to ask those questions to people, who have the same concerns. And, part of the reason that I started the group originally is because there's a lot of side gigs groups out there for different demographics and things like that. But when I went onto those, when I was first starting out, I kind of felt like I couldn't say what I wanted to say, because I think physicians have different concerns when they're going into side gigs than some other people or other groups of people may. And so, I couldn't say, all these people who were talking about spending 6 hours a day on social media. Well, I wasn't going to do that. I'm a full-time physician, right? There's no way. People who were talking about, the income concerns and the tax concerns are very different depending on which tax bracket that you fall into, or malpractice concerns. Can I get sued for doing this? Those are all questions that I couldn't necessarily ask in those sorts of forums. And so that's why I think that physician side gigs is such a unique place, because you can ask people who sort of have the same mentality as you and have gone through the same process as you and understand the opportunity costs that you have when you're pursuing your side gigs, and give you advice accordingly. So it's been really great.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the aspect of collaboration and networking is huge. And like you said, physicians have sort of unique things about them, unique challenges. We may have a little bit higher income, but we have less time. So when we're looking at a side business, we might be more willing to pay to hire somebody to do X, Y, Z versus somebody who's bootstrapping something that has no cash. They're going to be putting in more time and they don't have the money. So, I think it's awesome to have a group like that. And there's a little bit of a trust factor too, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Physicians, treat physicians a certain way. There's a certain level of professionalism, a certain level of trust that comes into it. I think it's fantastic.
I agree. I think that trust thing is really huge, right? Because we're so used to having all these other professionals that sort of prey on us in some, the financial advisor is definitely the stereotypical example. But in general, other people sort of take advantage of us because they know we don't have the time and they know we don't have the knowledge. And so having a place where you can get advice from people who are in some way linked to you, Right. I think we all feel some sort of kinship with other physicians, regardless of whether we've met them or not, and regardless of whether we should or not, we just do. And so having that feeling of comfort and, being able to be honest about what your reality is really great.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think the growth of that group is just, a testament to you, and it just shows you the mentality of physicians these days. So I think that's spot on. Any resolutions, goals, etc. for 2018? Loaded question.
Yeah, that's another one where I could ask you how much time you have. I think the biggest one for me right now is really just, for somebody who talks about work-life balance, right now with everything that I have on my plate, I feel like I am starting to shift away from having a good work-life balance. And so I'm really trying to do things like say no every once in a while and, set extreme limits for how much time I'm going to be spending on my side gigs, things like that. And one of the biggest things about that is that I really need to get more sleep, and I need to shift more of my work to morning hours. And so that's what I'm really working on at the moment, because it's hard to convince myself to turn off at the end of the night when I finally got some quiet time to myself. The kids are in bed, everything's quiet, and I think, well, I should use this time to do work. But the fact is that I've had a busy day, I'm tired from my day of work, and I'm just not very effective. And so my husband has this little app on his phone that always rings at like somewhere between 10:30 and 11, depending on where he set it. And it's like, go to sleep now to get 7 hours of sleep.
That's huge.
He lives by it. And I always kind of look at it and I think, oh, I should do that. And then I never actually do. An hour later, I'm still typing on my computer. And I have always known that when I wake up in the morning, when I can actually drag myself out of bed in the morning, that I actually can get work done and get it done really efficiently if I do it in the morning. So, even though I said earlier that I'm not a morning person, I really do want to become that person who sits down with my laptop, has my glass of orange juice in my hand, has some cereal at 6 a.m. before the kids are awake, and just pounds out some articles, because my head's a lot more clear then. So that's my biggest resolution right now that I'm trying to work on, is actually listening to my husband's little timer thing.
Well, I no, I think that's great. I think both of those things, saying no, more sleep. I recently read an article related to, all these New Year's resolutions and things like that. And because, everybody thinks about it. But this whole article was about goals versus systems, and the idea that, those who just set a goal usually do not do as well as those who create systems. And I thought that was really powerful because you set a goal and, you work towards it, you achieve it, and then what?
And then what?
Right. But if you set up a system for doing whatever it is that you want to do, then, you have the system, you can achieve, you can tweak the system. I'll see if I can find the article and link it in the show notes, but they compared,
that'd be great.
They compared Roger Federer with, I believe it was Leighton Hewitt, and how Federer had these systems in place for becoming a better player. Then he had a system in place for becoming, a better player, as he was aging. It was really an interesting article, and it really kind of shifted my mindset on thinking more about systems versus just a goal. So
I think that that's actually really good. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately because, my kids are getting to this age right now where occasionally there's a temper tantrum or, things will go wrong. And we're trying to teach them, how do you deal with that, right? And it's not... I remember talking to somebody or reading an article or something where they said, well, telling your kids to calm down doesn't help, right? Nobody wants to be told to calm down when they're in the middle of a temper tantrum. And so saying your goal should just be to breathe and calm down is not necessarily a good way of dealing with a problem, right? So then there's all these mindfulness exercises and all these sorts of exercises that you can go through that they say that you should work with your kids to sort of bring them down slowly, systemically, get them to think about what they're going to do and really put those systems in place so that in the moment, you're not having to say to them, calm down. You're saying, okay, let's go through our system. And then they go through step by step by step. And it's funny because, I'm not one of those people who really does, I don't do yoga every day and meditate every day or anything like that. And I was never a big believer in mindfulness, but I do see with my kids that if I do set those systems in place where I say, okay, these are the steps, this is the situation that we're in, these are the steps we're going to go through. And it is much more effective, right? And giving them that tool, that can be applied to so many different situations as opposed to just saying, well, okay, when, kid 1 takes the toy from kid 2, you guys need to just stop doing that and hug it out and it's over and then you share or it's going away. Instead of that saying, like, let's put together a system in place for how do you deal with frustration with your brother when it happens. And it's funny because they're basic things, but we don't do that, right? Our tendency is to want to just plug a hole. And I do think that those systems and having those approaches and developing those approaches will obviously be much more ubiquitous in terms of applying them to other situations and ultimately being able to actually continue to achieve goals as opposed to just, like you said, finishing one thing and being done with it. So,
yeah, for sure. All right, we are going to move on to the last section here of our interview, and we're going to go with the one thing or the one action that you want listeners to take after listening to today's episode.
So I guess the one thing that I've been encouraging everyone to do lately, and so I'll pose it to the listeners as well, is just to think about, to take some time to think about where you are in medicine and whether you're happy with it. And if you're not, or even if you are, think about one tangible thing that you can change, big or small. It doesn't matter how big or small, and just work on getting that thing done. And I feel like by setting that process where you do that, and then once you achieve that, setting another goal, and now we've just talked about systems as opposed to goals, so maybe that's not the best way of doing it. But I think that really thinking of small, tangible things that you can change in your life in medicine to make things better, whether it be, I should start my day a half an hour later, or I should make a point of getting outside once a day, whatever that thing is that's going to make you feel a little bit better about where you are in medicine. And when we talked about mentorship, finding a mentor, basically find one thing that you really want to change and just get it done.
Very cool. Is there one thing you wish you had done differently in your career so far?
So we talked a little bit earlier about just saying no. And I really wish that I had learned to say no earlier and just ask for what I wanted without apologizing for it. And I think that is something, I still wish that saying no came easier. And that's still something that I'm working on, because I do think that it's something that holds us back. I think it's something that holds physicians back in general, because we're afraid to say no. We've been trained in these systems that really, you do what you're told and then you go above and beyond. And even if you don't like something, you just kind of suck it up. And to some degree, you have to do that in medicine, obviously. But I think that for the things that really weren't contributing to patient care and were just things that were being asked of me that maybe might have been unreasonable, and I knew they were unreasonable, I really wish that I would have learned earlier to sort of speak up for myself and say those things. And I think that it took a long time to realize that I could do that. So I wish I would have done that earlier.
Yeah, I think that it could be applicable to a lot of us out here. How about one resource that you would recommend that's not your own?
So there's so many good resources that I've read lately. People keep recommending books to me, and I keep reading them and thinking, why hasn't everyone read this book? But the one that I really think that everyone should read is Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. And I'm sure a lot of people have read it already, but if you haven't, I think that you should. And I'm not necessarily saying that I agree with everything in it, but I think it's a great dive into some of the struggles that professional women face. And importantly, I'm recommending this to everyone. I'm not just recommending it to the women, but to the men as well. Because like we've talked about today, if 50% of physicians are going to be women, then it's important that everyone, regardless of gender, understands these issues so that we can build systems that help physicians to be able to do their best within these systems. And so, good leaders, male, female, whatever, everybody needs to know that it's really important for us to recognize these professional issues, because they're things that are going to impact the field of medicine, right? If we can't keep women in medicine because we make it too hard for them to operate within these systems, and we make it too hard for them to have job flexibility, or we make it too hard for them to have babies, those are all things that are going to ultimately impact the field, because we already have a physician shortage and you have more people that are withdrawing themselves from that system. Well, how's that going to work? So I think that, it's really important for those gender sorts of issues and millennial issues and all of these things to really be discussed on a bigger scale. And I think Lean In does a really good job of not making it just about medicine, but just talking about the struggles that professional women face, and using that in a way to, I think that we should all be sort of using those lessons to think about how we can change the culture of medicine to be more friendly.
Okay, well, I'm going to put that on my list. I've promised myself that I'm not buying any more books until I get through the ones that I have, because I've got quite a few here at home that are laying around. So,
I can't even tell you how many books I've gotten out of the library that I've requested because they have wait lists for so long, and then I request them and I finally get them, and I know I only have them for 3 weeks because there's a million other people on the wait list after me. And so I think that is the only thing that makes me read them, is the fact that I know I can't renew them. But sometimes they get returned without me ever having read them, and then they just go back onto my wait list.
Well, that's a good resource too, though. Instead of buying them on Amazon, then I guess you get to, get them from the library. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I probably should just buy them on Amazon. I'd probably get to them when I actually wanted them more, but I don't know. I'm a big believer in the public library, so.
Very cool. All right. Well, for the travel junkie, the very last question here: the one place that you'd fly to tomorrow if you had no commitments and infinite resources.
Oh, so no question in my mind. I don't know if you've heard of Torres del Paine in Chilean Patagonia.
Mm-mm.
So we have done the Argentinian side of Patagonia before, and it was gorgeous. But the Chilean side is actually even much more beautiful. And if you haven't seen it, you really need to just type in Torres del Paine into your Google search and put images and just see the pictures that come up, because they are stunning. And so we have been trying to get there for so long. But the problem is that there's only one major resort, or like one major hotel that's on, right in the park, and everything else is a bunch of hostels. Mm-hmm. And we've sort of passed the stage in our lives where we're going to do the hostel thing. And the resort or hotel, or however they frame it, is just, it's ridiculously expensive, number one. And number two, it is booked solid for years. And
Wow.
so and especially during holiday times, I think during the rest of the year, you could probably still get in on a relatively short notice. But for this winter break, for example, we ended up going to Hawaii, but we had the opportunity, a very rare opportunity, to leave the kids with my parents and go, because my parents usually travel during the winters, and this winter they decided that they usually go to India for a few months, and they didn't go this year. And so they were really great about telling us that they would keep the kids and we could go wherever we wanted. So we looked at each other and we're like, that's it, we're going to Torres del Paine. And of course we looked up this resort, and for Christmas time, or like the holiday season in general, it's booked for like the next 3 years. So,
Wow.
So we couldn't do that. So then we ended up taking the kids when we went to Hawaii, which was also a great trip.
Not a bad second choice.
Yes, no, not a bad second choice, but it is by far at the top of our bucket list. So one day I will make it and I will write about it, and it will be amazing.
Well, very cool. I have a new thing to look up now. I had not heard of this place, but I will definitely check it out.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and having such a great conversation. Where could people reach you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So newly launched and still somewhat of a work in progress is my website, which is just www.nishamehtamd. That's NISHAMEHTAMD.com. And that has all the links to all my social media and LinkedIn pages and all of that. So that's probably the best place to go originally, and it'll sort of link you to everything else.
Perfect. Well, Dr. Nisha Mehta, thank you again for being on Doctors Unbound.
Thanks so much for having me. I had a great time.
Thank you for listening to Doctors Unbound podcast. Remember to head over to doctorsunbound.com to access all the show notes and resources discussed in this episode. Now, it's your turn to be unbound.